Welcome to Sleepy Classic Tales. Today we're telling The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, published in the year 1907. Two friends travel down the Danube in a paddle boat and come into a wilderness of water and willow scrub, in which, for a night and a day, they learn how thin the wall is between our world and what lies behind it. Make yourself comfortable, breathe calmly, and let yourself be carried on to the great river on a windy summer day. After Vienna, and long before it reaches Budapest, the Danube enters a country that is among the loneliest in Europe. The banks grow flat, the stream breaks up into arms and side channels, and for many miles a wilderness spreads out of swamps, sandbanks, and islands that come and go with every flood. And everything, islands and banks alike, is covered with willows. Not with trees. The willows there never become trees. They stay bushes as high as a man, supple in unforeseeable masses, and when the wind goes over them, waves run through the silver gray as over a second sea, and the whole plain seems to move and to breathe. Through this country we traveled, my friend the Swede and I, in a Canadian canoe, on a journey that had begun in the mountains of the Black Forest. The Swede was the best companion for such an undertaking that one can imagine. Taciturn, practical, without nerves, a man who in every situation looked first to the cooking pot and then to the stars, in that order. We had traveled well for weeks, but that summer the Danube was in flood. Rain and snowmelt had made the stream rise, and as we left Pressburg behind us, the innkeeper on the bank warned us. At this water level, one should avoid the marsh stretch. The stream was there without path or rule. We laughed, as young men laugh, and went in. And at first the stream proved us right. It was a glorious run. The water carried us with a force that made the paddle almost superfluous, brown and broad and singing. The sun stood high, and around us the willow land fled past, island upon island, silvery, surging to the edge of the world. But toward evening something changed. The wind, which had blown strongly all day, grew into a storm without a single cloud in the sky. A strange, howling wind under a blue heaven that whipped the willows and threw the spray of the little waves into our faces. And to me, sitting forward in the boat, a thought came for the first time that I did not summon and did not want, and that yet remained. That we were not welcome here. I kept it to myself. As the sun stood low, we chose one of the larger islands and drew the boat ashore. A sandbank of perhaps 2 acres, densely grown with willows, in the midst of the rushing stream. It was a camping place like 100 others before. That, at least, is what we told ourselves. The island was quickly explored. It took no 10 minutes. Sand, willow scrub, at the upper end a low crown of ground, no tree, no stone, no sign that a human being had ever been here. While the Swede pitched the tent, I went to gather wood, and as I did, I looked more closely at the thing that had already occupied me from the water. The stream was gnawing at our island. The flood tore whole pieces of sand from the upper end. One could watch how the edge crumbled and lump after lump fell into the brown water. And I reckoned to myself, half in jest, that at this rate the island would in 2 days be smaller than our tent. The wind still raged, but the evening light was of great beauty, and we cooked, ate, smoked, and the Swede spoke of stretches and hours, and of breakfast, as was his way. And yet, I will tell it honestly, for that is what this story is about, yet with the setting foot on this island, something had entered into me for which I had no name. It was not a thought, rather a sensation, as one feels the nearness of a person in a dark room. The feeling of being watched. Not by eyes, that is the difficult part, but by the region itself, by the willows. They stood in masses around our little camp, millions across the plain, and in the last light, when the wind ran through them, they looked like an assembled crowd that bows and rises again, and waits. I told myself everything a reasonable person tells himself: the nerves, the long day, the eternal wind that wears on any man. It helped as much as such things help. When it was dark, I climbed once more to the crown of the island to look at the water level, and up there, in the storm, under a sky full of racing stars, I looked out over the black, rushing plain. Nothing but willows. Willows. Willows to every horizon. No light, no roof, no human being for 20 miles. And then I knew all at once what had been creeping over me since our arrival. We had camped on 100 islands, in forests, on lonely banks, and always the earth had been friendly or indifferent. This region was neither. It was strange. Strange in a sense the word otherwise does not have. We were not here in the wilderness. We were in a foreign country, in a place that obeyed another order, and our little island with the fire on it was an outpost in a land whose inhabitants we did not know and did not see, and who had very well noticed us. I climbed down, said nothing, and crawled into the tent. The Swede was already asleep, calm as always. Outside the wind howled, the stream rushed, the willows lashed. And beneath all that noise, quite deep, I sometimes thought I heard another sound, a soft, ceaseless vibrating, as of an enormous bell, very far off, or very near. That could not be decided. I woke in the middle of the night, and with a start, as one wakes when someone calls one by name. The wind had slackened, the stream rushed more softly, and through the tent wall fell moonlight. Something had woken me, and I lay still and listened. And then I knew that I would go outside, little as I wanted to. I crawled out of the tent into the bright night and stopped as though I had been tied fast. Over the willows there was something. I saw it, and I say at once, I have never been able to prove that I saw it, and the part of me that wished to stay sane spoke even then of moonlight and mist and deceived eyes. But what I saw was this. In the height above the scrub, in the rising haze of the stream, shapes were moving. Great, brownish, intertwined bodies that rose out of the willow thicket, being upon being, in an unending row, winding and turning, upward, ever upward, as though they climbed through a column of haze toward the sky. And they were huge, and they were many, and their movement had something so solemn and purposeful about it that the word apparition would not come up at all. It looked like a procession, like an ascent of beings that had nothing to do with man, in a place that belonged to them, at a doing that no human being was meant to comprehend. I stood in the sand, my heart in my throat, and stared, and with the fear, that was the strangest thing, something else mingled. A wonder to the very edge of awe, for what rose up there was beyond all human measure, and it took no notice of me. How long I stood, I do not know. At some point, I did what a human being does in such situations. I sought the explanation that would let me sleep. Moonlight, I told myself, haze over the water, the surging willow tops behind it, all together an image that the excited nerves ordered into shapes. I forced myself to look and to see only haze. It nearly succeeded, Then I crawled back into the tent and lay awake until the gray of morning, and beside me the Swede breathed deep and even, and I envied him every breath. In the morning the sun shone, the wind was fresh, the water glittered, and the night seemed to me the offspring of an overwrought head. I resolved to tell the Swede nothing. He was the last person to trouble with such a thing. But at breakfast, between 2 bites, the Swede said, without looking up, in his calmest voice, a sentence that made the cup stop in my hand. He said, "We ought to travel on today. This region here." He searched for a word and then took the simplest. "This region here is no good." Travel on. We wanted, the stream did not want it. On the morning round, the first thing turned up, the Swede's paddle was gone. We searched the whole island. Twice it stayed gone, and yet in the evening it had lain under the boat, as always. Then the second thing. In the bottom of the canoe, which lay high and dry in the sand, ran a long, clean slit through the outer skin, as though a sharp stone had drawn it, only there was not a single stone on this island, and in the evening the boat had been whole. And the third thing, the smallest, and in its way the most uncanny. All around, tent and boat, everywhere in the sand, were impressions, flat, funnel-shaped hollows, the size of a hand, by the dozen, as if from great fingertips pressed vertically into the sand. "The wind," I said. "The sand forms such shapes when the wind whirls over it." The Swede looked at the hollows a long while and said nothing, and his silence was louder than any answer. We patched the boat with what we had. The resin had to dry in the sun. Before the next morning there was no thinking of departure, and the Swede began to carve a new paddle from a willow branch, calm and thorough, as he did everything. But I watched him at it, and I saw what I had never seen in him. He paused in his carving, his head tilted, and listened. And then I resolved to bear no longer alone what I was bearing, and asked him straight out what he made of this place. He did not answer at once. Then he laid the knife down and said it was better not to think, and better still not to speak. Not because it was nonsense, but because thinking called the things. "Thoughts out here were like sounds in the mountains," he said. "One should not shout where avalanches hang." And then, after a long pause in which only the stream rushed and the willows lashed, the most level-headed man I knew spoke aloud for the first time what we both thought. "We had come here," he said slowly, "to a place where the wall was thin. There were such places. Places where another world touched ours, a world with other measures and other inhabitants who had as little to do with us as we with the ants in the sand. And we two sat with tent and cooking pot exactly on the threshold. Our only salvation was to stay small, to be still in the head as in the mouth, to show no fear. Fear was loud. Fear made us noticeable. They had probably already brushed against us, he said, but found us in the real sense they had not yet. The humming, the searching went round about us the whole time. And if we stayed inconspicuous until morning, we might perhaps get away. I asked him what would happen if not. The Swede took up his knife again and carved on, and only after a while did he say, without looking at me, "Then the stream finds a victim. Again and again people have drowned on this stretch. One must just ask oneself," he said, "why exactly so many?" The day passed, as days pass when one waits for the night. We did the usual things with unusual care. Checking resin, ordering supplies, hauling wood, and we spoke about usual things, with a diligence that both of us were aware of and at which neither laughed. For the humming was now to be heard by day. It lay beneath all the other sounds, beneath wind and water, a deep, metallic vibrating without direction. If one held one's ear to the sand, it came from the earth. If one lifted one's head, it came from the sky. And it was strongest when one stopped listening for it. Toward evening, I climbed to the crown to check the water level, and the sight took from me the rest of my calm. The stream had eaten further. The island had visibly grown smaller. Our piece of sand was shrinking away beneath us like ice in warm water. At supper, then, the thing with the bread happened. The Swede divided the rations, paused, and asked whether I had taken from the bread. I had not. The loaf, yesterday still almost whole, was diminished by a good piece, and the cut surface, we both saw it in the firelight, was not cut and not torn, but smooth and slightly curved, as though something had taken a mouthful, wishing the bread no harm, only tasting. We ate to the end in silence. And then came the night, and with it our resolve to stay still and small lost its hold piece by piece. It began with the Willows standing nearer. I say it as it showed itself. In the last daylight, the distance between the scrub and our tent was as great as in the morning. In the firelight, an hour later, it was so no longer. One saw no movement, never. One saw only the result, as with the hand of a clock. The Swede laid on wood until the flames stood high, and we sat close together and talked in half voices about Pressburg and Budapest and things neither of us was thinking of. Then the humming stopped. From one breath to the next, silence. A silence like a held breath, and it was worse than any sound. For now, everything listened, and we both knew. It was listening for us. And into this silence, I made the mistake. A branch broke in the fire. A shower of sparks flew up. Something large seemed to stand at the edge of the circle of light, and I sprang up and screamed. Only one sound, a single one. Then I had myself in hand. But it had happened. The Swede gripped my arm with an iron grip, and we stood motionless at the fire, and around us a movement ran through the willows that did not come from the wind. The wind had ceased. A bowing and rising that ran in upon us from all sides at once like rings on a pond, only reversed, from outside inward. And above us, high over the island, the air grew heavy, and the humming set in again, nearer now, and it no longer sounded searching. It sounded found. What happened in the next minutes I can only tell as I experienced it. Seen from outside, we did little, two men standing motionless at a fire. But over us, something descended. The air grew thick as before a thunderstorm. The humming swelled to a droning that I felt more in the chest than in the ear. And then came the pressure, a weight without touch that laid itself on head and shoulders, on the breath, on thought itself. And with the pressure came the pull. I must call it that. It was the will to go there, toward the willows, into the willows, up, over. The direction had no name, but the tug was as real as a hand at the collar, and the most dreadful thing about it was, it did not feel hostile. It felt like release, like the end of all that was small, and a part of me wanted to follow. Jubilantly, it wanted to follow. I understood later that this was the real danger of that threshold, not to be devoured, but to go. The Swede tore me to the ground. He threw me literally into the sand, face down, and pressed me down and gasped into my ear with a voice I did not recognize. Don't think. Pray, sing, count, but don't think of them. And there in the sand, my face in the cold grains, my fingernails in the balls of my hands, I did what he said. I counted. I counted aloud 100, 200. I prayed children's verses. I filled my head with numbers like a bucket with stones so that nothing else would fit in. And slowly, it may have been minutes or an hour, the pressure lessened. The droning lifted away from us, rose, dispersed, became again the distant, directionless humming, and the air was air again. We crawled into the tent like beaten men. Sleep was not to be thought of. We lay dressed side by side and listened, and at some point toward morning, exhaustion must have been stronger than everything else, for I started up out of a black, dreamless hole, and the place beside me was empty. I called. Nothing. I rushed out. The fire was ash, the morning gray and windless. The stream rushed, and then I saw him. The Swede stood at the lower end of the island, at the very edge where the water was eating the sand, upright, motionless. His face turned to the stream, and he did not stand like a man who looks. He stood like a man who is being called. And while I ran toward him and screamed his name, against the rushing, against the humming that all at once was everywhere again, the most sober, firm, unshakable person I have ever known took a step toward the water. I reached him at the last moment. My hand got hold of his shoulder as the water was already taking his boots, and I tore him backward, and we both fell into the wet sand. He resisted. For one dreadful breath, my friend fought against me with the strength of a stranger, and his eyes were open and empty and full of peace. That was the worst, this peace. Then, as though someone had closed a door, it went out. He went slack, looked at me, recognized me, and over his face ran a trembling, and the big, calm Swede laid his head in the sand and wept. Later we sat by the fire, drank boiling hot tea, and hardly spoke. He remembered nothing. Of a calling, he only said. Of a calling that had been more beautiful than anything he had ever heard. And I asked no further. But strange, from that hour the air was different. The humming was still there, yet it had withdrawn. It lay again beneath things instead of over them, and the pressure was gone, as though something were sated. We avoided saying it aloud. We finished patching the boat in silence, packed, waited for favorable light, and then, in the early afternoon, as we carried the canoe to the water, we found it. At the lower end of the island, in a little bay where the current lays down driftwood, there lay among branches and foam a dead man. A peasant, a raftsman perhaps, days already in the water, come from far upstream and washed up here. Here, at our island, in this hour. We stood a long while in silence, and neither said what both were thinking. That the stream had found its victim, as the Swede had called it, and that by a hair's breadth it would have been another. We did for the dead man what two men with a paddle boat can do. We brought him higher onto the sand, for the fishermen who would find him, and covered him. And as we lifted him, the last thing happened of which I have to tell. Over his skin, on arms and chest, lay close together small, flat, funnel-shaped marks. The same hollows, like fingertips, that we had found by the dozen in our sand the morning before. The Swede saw them, and I saw them, and we laid the man down and went to the boat and set off, out into the middle of the great brown stream. and neither of us looked back until the island had vanished behind its bend. In the evening, we reached inhabited land, smoke from chimneys, voices, a ferry. The world had us again. But I have never since walked past a willow thicket without its looking at me. And when the wind runs through it and the silver gray bows and rises, then I know what I know. That our world has walls, and that the walls are not everywhere equally thick, and that there are places where one should be quiet, in the mouth and in the head, and grateful for every morning on which the stream lets one travel on. That was our short retelling of The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. Two men come to a place where another world borders on ours, and get away, at the price of knowing that such places exist. Perhaps that is man's oldest reverence, to be quiet in the presence of what is greater than he is. Good night, and if you like, we'll hear each other again tomorrow at Sleepy Classic Tales.